today's session, we will refer to third-party risk management as the capability to identify, assess, monitor, and manage the risks that third parties bring to an organization. Well, why do we think this is actually a very worthwhile investment of your time to join us in the session today? Well, on the one hand, the importance of third parties for the business has constantly been growing. But on the other hand, I think many organizations really still struggle to get it right. So therefore, the objective of third-party risk management is to help you find the right response to the risks that these third parties introduce to your organization. So the topics that we are looking to cover today, we're actually going to talk about the challenges and the obstacles to effective third-party risk management. We are looking to talk about what good third-party risk management looks like. We're also going to address what you can do or how you can move towards a more effective TPRM. And we will also have a showcase for you on how you could use technology to enable powerful and effective TPRM. You will also have the opportunity to ask questions. So throughout this session, you can actually leave your comments, your questions in the chat box. And then towards the end of the session, we will have a Q&A, time for Q&A, where we will be then addressing and responding to your queries. So for today's session, we have actually brought together a team of panelists that are looking forward to spend the next 1 to 1.5 hours with you. So we have with us Gavin Rosettenstein, a partner in our KPMG Australia firm, and he's also the regional KPMG lead for third-party risk management. Also with us is Zainab Zoilu. She's also based in Australia and also a specialist on third-party risk management. Then with us on the panel, we do have Arpit Agarwal. He's a KPMG ServiceNow platform architect, and he will be running the demo for us later on, and he will be supported by Titan Tiranathavat in order to showcase the power of the ServiceNow platform for third-party risk management. And last but not least, the panel is completed by Kun Natcha Onsuntonla and myself, Florian Megan. Both of us are members of the FS advisory practice based here in Bangkok, in Thailand. So yeah, we are really looking forward to take you through today's session and share some relevant insights that you then should be able to leverage and to use in your organization to improve your third-party risk management capabilities. But okay, let's jump into the subject matter of today's session. So what we are observing clearly over the last few years, and that's a trend that is still continuing, is that business models evolve. And a key component in these evolving business models is an increased use of third-party service providers. So if we think about digital banking or e-insurance, we actually have quite a number of third-party service providers that are being utilized in order to provide these services and products to the customers. So that will range from large international cloud service providers. It will go through some software development companies and even include maybe some small local boutique that will do some website design, to just name a few examples. But then with that increased number of third parties on the one hand, the risk profile of the organization is also evolving and changing. And that's where third-party risk management really comes into the picture in order to help the organization manage that changing environment in such a way that the risks will not cause significant adverse impacts on the organization. So if we think of a scenario, again, where we as an organization might be sharing customer data to one of our service providers. Actually, the weakest link in this chain, it might be our business partner, it might be our service provider. Because imagine if a data leak occurs at that service provider because they might not have established a very robust security controls, then in the end, the reputational damage that comes out of it will be with us as the organization that has initially shared this customer data with our service provider. So that actually leads us to the key themes that KPMG has identified in a large survey that has been conducted globally across multiple countries. And the aim of that survey was really to get a first-hand impression from senior third-party risk management professionals to get a sense on what are the challenges and the priorities which they are seeing when it comes to the third-party risk management. So there are actually a number of challenges. Sorry, if we might move back to the previous slide first. A number of previous slide, please. Okay. Yes, so we briefly touched on the example of data leak. So for a data leak, obviously that's one very bad, impactful incident that might happen that damages the reputation. But those are not just limited to data leaks. There are also a lot of other potential events that could happen and might even disrupt our business continuity, but might disrupt the business. And actually, that danger is very real because in the survey, we noted that actually 3 out of 4 professionals found out that over a period of 3 years, they had suffered at least one major incident that disrupted their business. Other themes that we have found there relate to, I think, the constant challenge around securing the necessary funding and the budgets to make the TPRM function as effective as possible. Oftentimes, that's because as long as things seem to be running smoothly and no really bad things happening, it's really hard to generate or to make it visible that there is a need to invest into the TPRM capabilities. Then on terms of technology is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, there are oftentimes very high expectations that, okay, we plug in a technology solution and suddenly all our problems go away, which is actually not really true. So what technology can do, yes, it can enable our well-designed operating model. But what we also need to keep in mind that the users might also need to find the right balance between, okay, what's the art of the possible and what's actually a pragmatic and feasible solution for the organization. So being realistic and using technology as an enabler, not as a silver bullet, might be a suitable approach here. Then I think the last 2 themes, just very briefly touching on those, resource constraints. So we talked about a bit earlier that the importance of third parties keeps growing for the businesses. The amount of work that is required to be managing those third-party risks effectively is therefore also increasing. It's not just more third parties, it's also probably a wider range of the risk domains that are being looked at. So in that context, if we need to do more with the same resources, I think the imperative evolves that we say, okay, we need to find ways to maybe work smarter rather than working harder and just doing more. So thinking about risk-based approaches, I think, is one of the considerations there. And then last but not least, we do see the struggles around operating models. And I guess here a lot of the lessons learned kind of surfaced during the pandemic when people went back and reassessed their third-party relationships. And that really was an eye-opening experience that identified a number of weaknesses in these operating models, so that going forward, I think there has been a clearer perception of the need to go about changing something. So without much further ado, I think at this stage, I would like to invite Zainab to maybe share some further takeaways that this survey has allowed us to identify. So Zainab, if you could share some further thoughts and insights with us, please.
Very happily, Flo. Thank you so much. What I would like to do now is to take you through a little bit in-depth results from the our survey and give you a little bit of the results a little bit in-depth when it comes to this financial services in more detail, but also some of the key highlights that we're seeing. Better it is, target operating model, better it is about, technology itself. Later on, what's going to happen, we're going to take you a little bit details in, how we can approach it, what the future of TPRM looks like, together with Nan and Gav. But what I would like to share first and foremost, it is very clear from the survey that the weaknesses in the TPRM operating model are proving to be a major problem for many of the organizations and the businesses worldwide. And this leads to many of the missed opportunities where we're trying to mitigate the risks effectively. And many of the organizations are currently exposed to disruption, monetary loss, and reputational damage. The results from the R survey is quite worrying, actually, if you just look at the numbers of how many of the organizations have been impacted by the disruptions in the last couple of years. And I think the results will not be a surprise for any of the people around, because we've seen publicly there are many growing, disruptions in many cases that exposes major organizations. One of the key statistics coming up is 73% of the respondents in our survey have experienced at least one significant disruption, definitely caused by their third parties within the last 3 years. If we look at it more frequencies, 38% have experienced more than 3 incidents and 14% have seen more than 6 incidents. I think it would be a lot higher, percentages if we look at the numbers as of today. And not only in the region, but more globally, we're seeing more and more disruptions coming from the third parties. Just simply from a cyber perspective, 62% of the network intrusions as of today originate from the third parties alone. And it is normally, through the supply chains, one way or the other, that has been interacted with the organizations. Addition to those, and I'm going to continue to throw a couple of numbers in the next 5 minutes. Please bear with me with that, because I think they're really important to highlight. 73% of the respondents said that the inefficiencies they see in their third-party risk management program is causing a lot of increased reputational risk, which was just a year before was 68%. So what we're seeing is there is more disruptions coming along the way. They face it live. We also see a lot more impact directly to the reputational, side as well for the organizations. If we just look at a little bit simplistic in the monetary terms, they also have a lot more worrying statistics. 54% of the respondents said that they're quite worried that their third parties might be overcharging, overbilling based on their services, because the existing processes and the tools are not helping them to really understand the exposures, or just helping them to understand if they might be paying more. And this is one simple perspective of this, but not only reputational, not only from the major disruptions, but we see operational failures as well, which exposes us from financially too. While we're seeing the challenges and the increasing number of the requirements that is coming from multiple angles, many organizations are still lacking the in-house capabilities and supporting technology as well. To manage the TPRM effectively, there is a need for having people to understand the multidisciplines quite well, and it doesn't currently exist in many of the organizations. If you look at the financial services alone, 53% of the respondents believe that they don't have the sufficient resources or the capabilities in-house to respond to the increasing needs to respond to those risks in the third-party space. In absence of critical skills, capabilities, and the capacity, organizations are pegging all their hopes onto technology solutions. And most organizations still believe there's going to be, I think, Flo, you rightly mentioned, they just believe there's going to be a magical solution. We're just going to implement a tool and then all the problems will fade away. However, if we just look at what we see in the market right now, most of the TPRM teams predominantly use maybe a form of workflow tools to support their day-to-day processes. Some teams may have some technology solutions to support the due diligence activities, but there is no holistic or the suite of solutions that really supports effectively the TPRM in an end-to-end fashion. 59% of our respondents were really frustrated by lack of visibility that their TPRM tools existing today were giving them around broader third-party risk in the organization. And less than half of them were just saying that the tasks across the TPRM universe are automated as of today. Organizations are keen to use more automation and technology solutions going forward. And in the next 3 years, roughly 60% of the organizations mentioned they want to implement more tools around managing their third-party risk management effectively. I'll just take a pause in here. I throw a lot of numbers, but I'm just going to take a step back and take you through the major challenges and the risks we're seeing across TPRM. And if you look at it, if we can move to the next slide, it's going to tell us a couple of things. And I know Gavin and Nan will take a little bit further steps to deep dive on the, risk domains and the technology and the future of the TPRM to support this. We clearly see 5 main challenges when we look at the TPRM holistically. We all know there is increased regulatory expectations. The requirements are becoming more onerous and complex. We know still, despite the decades long of efforts that we try to improve our risk management practices, we still have a long way to go. We have third-party risk management that touches many disciplines and many different teams in the organizations. It needs to be managed to be really benefit from the effectiveness. It needs to be managed through across the organization, across different teams, and across complex processes existing as of today. We know in all the organizations we have complex operating models. Sometimes it is federated, sometimes it is coordinated a little bit better, but there's high volumes to be responded, and our risk domains are ever-ending. They're continuously evolving. So we need to be responding to more complex needs, but in a more broadened space. But also, we have mentioned, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more in details today, our technology is not so supporting and the data is not there yet. Hence, managing all these risks and challenges, if it is not done well, can be extremely costly for the organizations, and currently it is not an easy task to handle. If we bring it all together, it is by nature that there is a heightened focus on the third-party risk management across all the industries, whether it is related to the regulatory pressures, is it a board concern, or management wants to get better visibility and better understand the exposures across the board. We just need to be on top of it. Digital tools at some stage, or the new solutions we bring to the organizations, will help to shoulder the burden. However, it's not going to be enough, and TPRM's remit is extremely expanding and at a very fast pace. This will definitely force organizations to, as Flo mentioned earlier, to employ a risk-based approach and to really effectively assess the risks across their third-party universe and across different types of services that organizations are benefiting from. In doing so, definitely there will be a need to find the smarter ways to how we're going to utilize our limited resources, skilled resources, supplemented with the technology, and getting a little bit to benefit from the industry offerings and the market intelligence as well. I hope I paved the way to now and where we're going to deep dive a little bit on the risk universe, because we said it is not staying where it used to be, it is ever expanding. And she's going to take us through the regulatory drivers and broader third-party risks. And then Gal will give us a little bit more insights about the client challenges we see, how the organizations are approaching, and how the future of TPRM is looking like. Back to you, team. And I'm not able to hear the room, but is it just for me? Yes, we're back to you. I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. So before I go to my topic, I would like to ask you what is the key leaks from the first key leak from the previous page. It is the increasing of the regulatory expectation. So my topic is about the regulatory landscape. In our local regulatory, you might already found that our local regulatory already issue some third-party risk management such as the BOT, like Bank of Thailand, already issue the third-party risk management implement guideline. Also like OIC also issue the outsourcing management, and SEC also have the requirements on the third-party management. From the overalls of the regulatory expectation, what they looking for. So they're looking for the life cycle of the third-party risk management. As you can see on our slide now, it will start with onboarding until like risk management or management on controls until continuity monitoring, and final is the offboarding or terminations. So all of the regulatory will focus like life cycle of the third party risks. So I might not go to all the topic on the slide, but I will give you like 5 focus area that you might focus on your third party risk management. So the first one is about the board involvement and your senior management accountability. So you might see on our local regulatory management looking for how the board that involved on the third party risks, how you ensure that you have the good overview of the third party risks to show your board and your board involvement. And we saw the trend that in UK or Australia they have assigned the senior management to be the accountability to control the third-party risks on each like vendors. Okay, that is the first one. So the second one is about the risk assessment. It's related with the maturity and the inherent risks of your third-party risk management. The key is you not only performed the risk assessment on your onboarding of the third party. However, you have to continue and monitoring along the way. So that is the second key focus. The third key focus is about the contextual. You might have the question, what is the key element that you need to put or you need to add on your contact, right? So actually, or the regulatory and our local regulatory already like summary the key element that need to put on the contextual. So I would recommend you to see on the BOT third party risk management implement guideline that they already have the list out of the key element that you should be add on in your contextual with the third party. So that the third one. So the fourth one, the regulatory will focus on the continuity and the exiting plan. So if you have some interruptions or like the service interruption, as for already says in the first key of the outlook, they might focus on the continuity of the service. So we already see in our local regulators that require you to review or require you to make sure that you have the continuity plan or you have the plan to deal with that problem. If your third party have some interrupt, it will focus, like regulatory will focus you how you deal with that one. Okay, that's the first one. For my last key, the fifth one, is about the subcontractors. So like 4 or 5 party. So you might already have or already implement the third party leaks, or you might have managed on your third party leaks. But the question is how you ensure that your third party already manage their subcontract in the proper way, manage in the right way that you would like to see. So that is the last key, that you have to make sure that your third party already manage the subcontractors. Okay, that is the 5 key focus of the regulatory landscape that I would like to highlight you for today. And also, can you go to the next page of after the regulatory? As we mentioned here about the leaks, so this is the area of the third-party leaks or the common leaks that we already list out for you to be the common leaks that you should factors when you do the leak when you do the leak assessment. So if I would like to pick one, it might be like the financial visibilities, how you ensure that your third party not being your leaks, not being the leaks on your financials, or maybe they might have not light on the financial health, and it might bring the problem to your financials or your reputations. Or another one is maybe if you use the technologies, if you use the third party to service about the technology, you might have to focus on the security control, security leaks, cyber leaks, or like data privacy leaks on that. I can give you some example that if you not have the good management on the third-party leaks, is what is happened. So they have like maybe like 5 or 6 years ago in Thai that the bank used the ATM service, and that ATM service have some issues on the hack. That was hacked by the malware, so the ATM service was shut down. So they lose some money and they lose some reputation because of they have to stop some ATM service because of they have to uplift the security controls. Okay, that is my example. So actually for the key takeaway from the area of the third-party leaks, you already saw that there is a lot of leak here. So the key takeaway is the third-party leak is not just only one leak, but it's a lot of leaks, and the different vendors, different third parties will have the different of the leaks. So in the different of the leak, you might have to find out the expert from each leak to be the managed and control in the right way. So you might have the question in your mind, then how should you do that? How to be done? What the process that you need? Or like which one or who should be the responsible on that? Because of you see a lot of leaks here. So I will send to the next section for Gavin to talk about the target operating model for you. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Nan. So if we talk through now, I mean, we've heard from our speakers already around the themes and the challenges, etc., that organizations are facing, etc. And then we are definitely seeing across industries here, and specifically within financial services, that there is a need to do more. So in terms of there's an increased number of suppliers, third parties that need to be included and covered within that, and I'll come on to that shortly, as well as the breadth of types of risks, so the risk domains that are now included. And Nan just had the slide before, they're just talking around examples of risks that should be considered. And you can see that at the top there, when we look at an operating model or a framework, etc., that needs to be put in place, it is really around understanding, you see in the way it talks around the risk domains. They're example risk domains, but they need to be tailored and need to be relevant to your organization and to the regulatory requirements and other things based on the services and products that you deliver, and how you go to market. So the consideration of those risk domains at the top, they may change for others, but there'll be certain domains there that would be obviously relevant and of high focus for all financial service organizations. So the key thing there is making sure that you've baked it and you understand what those risk domains are, and that they are holistic, and that you can go deep enough as relevant enough based on the nature of the service that the third party or supplier is providing to you or supporting you in. What we do is we look at that in terms of below that, the life cycle phases. So in terms of engagement with the third party, you need to be very clear in terms of understanding those risks across the life cycle and all stages of the life cycle. So when you're looking through for a supplier or a third party and you want to engage them to provide or support a service, when you're going through the identification on the planning stage, you would need to understand what are the risks there that you need to be considering, and you want to make sure that they are brought into that decision-making process. As you flow your way through the due diligence and the risk decision processing, again, it'll be deep dives on different areas or different risk domains that are relevant for the nature of the service that that organization is providing to you or supporting to you. So you might find there will be areas there which you may want to go deeper as it relates to technology or cyber risks, depending on the nature of the service. It might be, say, for example, a cloud provider, and you want to understand those specific risks there at a more detailed level. Or there might be a service provider, as Nan was saying before, that may require or provide or have multiple fourth parties or other parties that are involved in the delivery of their service. So hence you want to understand, so for example, subcontractor risk or fourth party risk. So how are they managing and governing it, and how are you aware of the risks that are there? And again, hence, how are you managing and governing it? That will work your way through in terms of the contract management, the onboarding stage, and again, through to the ongoing monitoring and offboarding. So it's really important to ensure that there are activities in place to be able to assess and reassess risks of relevance across the life cycles there, and that you've identified the relevant controls and you've put controls in yourself to be able to manage and govern those risks through that process. When you consider it, for example, like one there, where you take the life cycle phases, you've got offboarding there to the far right. You want to have the considerations up front in terms of when you're engaging with the supplier or third party as to what potential considerations do you want to have in place when it comes to possible offboarding. There's obviously no intent when you're going into an arrangement that you'd like to offboard a supplier or you'd need to move away from a supplier. However, the consideration around what data is potentially shared, the continuity of services while you're offboarding or transitioning services, those types of considerations, you'd want to make sure that you're having those discussions and you're assessing and governing and you understand what it is when you're entering into that arrangement. And ideally, baking that into your contract to make sure that in the event of needing to move away and needing to offboard a supplier, you've got the appropriate guidelines in place, you've got the appropriate expectations in place, you can get access to data or whatever is required or needed that is there. And we have had multiple examples within Australia and across the region as well, for example, where organizations have shared data with certain suppliers, and when it comes to the offboarding stage, they've got inability to get access back to potentially highly sensitive customer information, intellectual property, etc. as well, that now sits with the vendor, with the supplier that you no longer want to be engaged with. And then how do you work through the contractual arrangements? Or how do you work through the situations of getting that data back? When we look at that, we say everything needs to be underpinned in terms of your foundations. So you can see that at the bottom there around the foundations of what we call a TPRM program. And it's really, really important to ensure that you've set up and you're aware of the structure of how you do it. So your policies and your procedures in place, how the organization is structured from an organization, a people perspective. So Zen spoke about a little bit before around how you maybe potentially have certain components that are centralized, other things that may be fragmented across the organization or business led. It's really important to have clarity of roles and responsibilities, who's accountable for making decisions and who's responsible for executing certain components of the process as well. So when you work through that, you may have teams that are engaged or involved. You may have specific teams, be it a cyber team, you may have a procurement team, you may have a fraud team, etc. within your organization. How do you ensure that those teams are engaged, again, across the life cycle? They're engaged at the right time. There's no duplication of activities that are being done, and there are strong handover points between those different teams. So how do you organize appropriately to be able to do that? And how do you set that in your policies and procedures around what is required, who does what are the handover points, etc. as well? That'll include skills and capability, and that'll allow the business to be able to ensure that they've got the appropriate information to then make decisions and act accordingly in terms of what the risks are as it relates to the service providers, third parties. The governance and the program effectiveness, that's twofold. One, it's governance of the program. So how are you managing and governing your third parties in totality, and understanding what is your list of third parties, who are they, how do you segment them appropriately, how do you know which ones are more material and more critical, through to those that are less material and critical, and obviously then focusing your efforts and dollars appropriately based on that. So when you're looking at it, you want to understand how you're managing that across the broader program, but then there's also governance on specific arrangements as well, and how you're managing the specific governance of those, and be it, are you engaging with a third party on a quarterly basis, 6 months, annual? If it's less risky, potentially less engagement with them as well. Data and reporting process, I'll come onto data a little bit later on, and likewise enabling technology, I'll come onto the subsequent pages as to what we see for those. So if we move over to the next slide, just talking around a few examples, and I won't go through all of these, a couple of examples as we've worked our way through and support organizations on their uplift of their TPRM programs, and some of the implementation challenges that we've seen in place, or opportunities as well, that organizations are facing. So you can see, as it relates to people, I mentioned briefly before around centralization of certain TPRM teams can significantly reduce workloads of those across the organization. And it's important to understand where centralization of certain components works and where others may not. And it is a business decision to understand as to how you do that. But we are seeing a stronger move towards centralization, and I'll come onto that in the coming pages in a few minutes. In terms of the process pain points, there continues to be lack of integration between teams. It's not necessarily just procurement and TPRM, but you can see between procurement, TPRM, cyber, fraud, a number of areas within organizations that there is a lack of appropriate integration and handover between them, and hence that's driving duplication or some multiple touch points with suppliers, going out and assessing them multiple times and potentially covering the same thing. So the lack of integration we're seeing has had an increase there of time going up to 40%. We can see around TPRM processes continue to be highly manual. That is starting to change, and we're starting to see that now as it works through the workflow tools, where we're starting to see things starting to take more of an automated approach, etc. as well. And there's continued focus that we're seeing now as it relates to automation more so as well on top of that. We're seeing in relation to revising your risk and procurement and other types of risk domain relevant questionnaires can really lead to a significant reduction. So if you're combining those assessments together and you have a single assessment over a supplier, which covers on the relevant risk domains for that supply arrangement, that can really reduce the number of questions that need to be asked to a supplier, and then that can really improve the information that is received back from those suppliers as well. So I'll give an example here. In Australia, we were assessing several hundred suppliers on behalf of one of the major banks in Australia. And it started out where it was a common question set that got shared. It was 200 odd questions that got shared with the supplier, and we were massively struggling with getting completeness and even receiving a lot of the information back. And the reason being was a number of the questions were just not relevant to the arrangement. They were just not relevant to the supplier. So when they're seeing a 200 question set, they would look at it and go, how can I do this? Why would I do it? Oh my gosh, my customer wants this. What am I going to do? And we would get back questions with 20 of them completed, 50 of them completed, etc., etc. The key thing here is making sure that the question set that's provided to your supplier is relevant for the arrangement and that you have in place with them, and it's relevant based on the information that you want to know, not necessarily information that just needs to be collated for the sake of it. Technology integration, if we move on there, so we're basically saying if you can get fully integrated TPRM architecture that's set up, it can significantly reduce operating costs. We've seen it between 20 to 35%. We're starting to see that number increasing quite a bit now as well. As we work through to the risk framework, we've seen that 80% of our clients are working on enhancing their fourth-party risk management program oversight. I would change that now so over the last probably 3 to 4 months, I would say pretty much almost 100% are now starting to look at their fourth-party risk management programs, and that is globally. So there's a significant focus now on understanding next level down in supply chains. We're seeing that across regulatory requirements now. There's just been set, for example, in Australia this week. There's been others across the region in the UK and the US, etc., where there's a strong focus on really understanding fourth parties and beyond, and the downstream providers that are engaged with that. So large programs in place to understand how to do that. And then the data and reporting, I'll come on to that briefly in the coming pages. So if we turn over the page. So what does the future of TPRM look like? And this is kind of where do we see TPRM going, and what does good look like, and what do we think it can expect it to be? So there are 4 key things there we see there across the top. One is compliant and robust. And the key thing here is the ability to monitor that, as we say in the first bullet point, the control environment and the risk profile for your critical third-party products and services on a consistent basis. So in doing that, the ability is to identify and understand who are your critical third parties. So you need to know your supplier list, your third-party list, and you need to have clarity on understanding where do your respective third parties fit into the delivery of your services. And by doing that, you then deem and segment your critical suppliers or critical third parties, and understand in quite a bit of detail what are the obligations, the risks, the respective controls that need to be in place to manage those services, and how do you ensure and stay on top of it, that you're aware of any changes in that risk profile. So in relation to the risks that they pose to your organization, you're on top of it and you can act on it accordingly. When we say consistent across the enterprise, I mentioned that briefly before. So how do you get clarity and consistency across the organization, across the group, in terms of how you manage or identify, assess, manage, and govern third parties? And when we talk here about third parties, it's not necessarily just what we would say, procurement-led goods and services. It's the ability to understand other types of third parties that may be included as well. So you may have distribution channels, brokers, affiliates, intergroup as well. So how do you get consistent practices that you can have in place to ensure that the way that you assess and govern those third parties is consistent across the organization? The level of information that is provided to those who are the business owners for those respective arrangements have the information that's needed consistently to be able to make the decisions that are needed. In terms of cost and time efficient, strong focus here really on reducing onboarding cycle times. And a lot of that is around how do you optimize and streamline your processes and ensure that you've got effective risk segmentation and due diligence processes in place. Now that can go through, we're coming on to the next one around the tools and technology, but well, I mentioned briefly before, you're going to need to understand and know more. You'll have more third parties that you need to try to get across, and an extended broader type of risk domains as well to cover. So the key thing is, how do you do more potentially with less? And it's really, really important to do that. And over the next 2 pages, I'll come into a bit more detail as to some of the expectations that we've put in place, or whether we see that are there, and that some organizations are starting to do. On the far right there, around integration with complementary processes and tools, really important to understand, again, as I was saying, around how does third-party risk link in with your broad operational risk programs, your broad operational risk frameworks, the tools that you have in place, your GRC systems, etc. What technology do you have in place that are ready to manage and govern, or components of it, and how do you integrate TPRM with those? At the bottom, under the enablers, data, extremely important. Really important to understand where this data sits and where you've got access to the data. The ability to have effective risk and control libraries, visibility of suppliers to services, really, really important. So complete inventory important, where does the data sit, and how can you connect the data to be able to report on it appropriately. Rules-based. So when I was talking before around the segmentation, so go through and understand how do you segment your suppliers, your third parties appropriately based on the potential, the procurement category that they sit within, the risks that they pose to the organization, and based on that, that should be able to tell you which risks are of higher focus and which risk domains or areas you should be focusing on, and how critical those third parties are to your organization. And based on that, that drives and determines your ongoing monitoring approach and the level that you need to engage with and do it appropriately. I won't touch on automation there. I'll move on to the use of managed services and risk intelligence. I'm going to touch on that in a page. And then, as I mentioned before, around the centralized service delivery model, we're seeing a lot of the activities coming together centrally in terms of how organizations will start to have a single area to do certain components, so a cyber area or a risk assessment area, a fraud area, but how do they then interconnect across it so you're not duplicating activities? If we move on to the next page, this is going to give you a bit of a view in terms of what we call our TPRM functional architecture. So when we look at this, and apologies, it's probably quite small on the page for you. When we look, you'll see there in the middle there, you can see the workflow automation. Okay, so we were talking around the different stages of the life cycle of an engagement with a supplier. Okay, and you've got there, so paying and third-party identification, your due diligence, contract management, etc., etc. What's really important to consider here is there are fantastic workflow tools in place that are out there to be able to do that, and you want to do that in a consistent manner so you're engaging with suppliers. But what's really important is how do you integrate with other technology or systems or source of data that exists within your organization. And you can see on the far left there, you've got potentially a contract lifecycle management tool or source to pay, and understanding, again, who are your suppliers? So how do you identify who they are, and how do you make sure that they go through the appropriate workflow? And there's reporting at the bottom, and the fact that the right risk committees and boards and others have got access to the right levels of information. You've got the end user portal that can pull the data down from there again, and you can use it, be it relationship owners, business owners, the TPRM team, etc. But what I wanted to kind of more so talk on here is you can also see on the right there that you're pulling on and integrating with your GRC tool. So you're getting information on risks and controls through the inventory there. You get information on issues and incidents and how do they impact and intersect with your arrangement with your third party. Some of the cooler stuff now is if you look above is really around how do you start making use of other services that are out there, such as utility-based services and risk intelligence, because that is really, truly where third-party risk is going. Well, the stuff I've been talking about before is foundational and fundamental and required. And from what I've seen across industry and across the region or across globally is a lot of organizations still need to work on the foundational stuff to make sure that the operating model is in place, that you've been able to get clarity of accountability and responsibility across the organization. You know who your third parties are, you're able to segment them, you can work more around the question sets. But once you've got that in place and you know what's going on, how do you start leveraging external data sources that may be there to supplement information that you've got, or utilize those data sources that may have information on financial viability, information on cyber, information on breaches, information on other considerations that are there. And they are new, and I've just included a couple of very, very brief examples there of ones you can see there on different watch lists, criminal lists, for example, Dun & Bradstreet's and LexisNexis. A number of them that are publicly available data or data sources to sign up to. That is where we see organizations starting to look at how do we get access into it and understand data or more up-to-date real-time assessments and data that is relevant to our suppliers, how they manage and the services back to us. So how do we utilize that data and know the standing of that organization, and it's refreshed and it is current, and it avoids the need for organizations to go out annually or every 2 years to redo assessments. And to go and get comprehensive assessments, you've got more real-time data that is there, and that is a key thing to note. The other one there is around the third-party utilities. There are several utility players globally as well that have been working on this in the last couple of years to do common shared assessments. So the intent there, for example, is that if they would do an assessment over, I'll give it just an example, take an IBM, they'll do an assessment over an IBM, and they can provide that assessment back to anybody who utilizes IBM for that type of service. And you've now got access and understand relevant risks, relevant controls, etc., and relevant exposures. And that report is produced once, but can be provided to many. And the intent there is that they've got an inventory in place that you'll be able to sign up to. And if you happen to utilize those suppliers, you've got access to those reports there that, again, you can use. They are a point in time, but the difference here is you've got a point in time report, plus you've also hopefully got access to external data sources where you can get more real-time data. And how do you now internally ingest that data is what the most important thing is. And that's where the skills need to be within organizations, to be able to leverage and utilize that data to say, so what does this mean for us and how do we act on it? Conscious of time, I'm going to move on to the next page very quickly and just talk about where we are seeing TPRM leaders focusing their time and effort. And you can see some of it links, and we've spoken briefly on it over the previous pages. So we see then the first cog on the left there around integrate and converge. Just a couple of the key things there, as I was saying, the integration between enterprise risk and compliance, really, really important. So organizations looking to understand what are the risks and how do we ensure that we meet our compliance obligations at the same time. So bringing obligations and risk into our risk profiles for our specific suppliers as well. And then how do we take those and integrate it back into the business? Operational resilience, significant focus on that we're seeing globally, and significant work that's under play now. We are seeing that again, as I mentioned briefly, that there was a standard that dropped in Australia this week around operational resilience. There's one in the UK. It is something that is going to continue through the pandemic and the significant disruption that we've seen through incidents, through cyber breaches, through other things in organizations. So how do organizations really understand where suppliers fit into it, third parties fit into it, and how do you be able to manage, govern, predict, react if need be in relation to those outages that Flo spoke about at the beginning of this as well. Simplifying the process on the far right. So again, simplify that service delivery model. How do you work through your risk segmentation, focus efforts where the highest risk is? So if you've got 5,000 suppliers, 10,000, 15,000, focus effort accordingly. So if you've got 50 there that you really care about and they're critical, focus your effort on those 50 and then slowly reduce the effort down based on the level of risk that they pose to your organization. The workflow technology, fantastic and great. That's one component in it. But as I mentioned before, around the consideration of those other areas that you bring into it as well. On the left there, implementing continuous monitoring. I think I've spoken about that already around the risk-based scoping and the use of internal and external data sources. We're seeing more and more moving towards that and some real-time scoring. The key thing here and the failure points that we've seen is that people have signed up to these databases, have signed up to these data sources, but they don't do anything with it. So they believe that now that they've signed up to it, they've got access to information, and fantastic, great. They start getting their emails coming through, they start getting all the data that comes through. But the most important thing is now that you've got the data, the ability to then integrate that into your systems, integrate it into your understanding and your risk profiling over that supplier, so then act accordingly if need be. That is the most important part there, and we're seeing organizations revisiting and rebuilding components on that. And then incorporating on the far right, incorporating emerging risks. So where are things going? So understanding and building our KRIs, the key risk indicators, or what we're seeing here is the risk lens expansion. And that's probably the biggest thing that we're seeing there is things that are moving out now to, as we're saying, concentration risk, subcontractor risk, beyond the fourth parties, fifth parties, etc., other types of considerations and risks that are coming into play. So having a program in place that can incorporate changes and additional types of risks that come into play. So with that, I am going to hand over now, I think, to Arpit and Titan to take us through a demo.
Sure. Thank you, Gavin. Moving on. Before we start the demo, I hope you are able to hear me fine. So I'd like to give a quick introduction of the ServiceNow platform. So the ServiceNow platform is a digital platform, and it offers workflows around technology, employee, and other workflows. So ServiceNow positions itself as a platform for digitalization, which means it offers a very strong capability for integrating with different system of records, bringing the data in, and using the workflow as a system of action or system of engagement. The ServiceNow platform offers bespoke applications for clients to support complex cross-enterprise workflow automation that seamlessly integrates the front end, the front, back, or the middle offices. Some of the applications, like I mentioned, are GRC, HR service delivery, IT service management. Here, as we can see on the screen, ServiceNow provides a gambit of applications under its GRC platforms. And some of these specific applications within the GRC umbrella, which the platform provides, are policy and compliance, vendor risk management, third-party risk management, regulatory change, audit management, privacy management, and etc. And all these products are supported by powerful platform features like workflow and orchestration, service portal, mobile app, chatbot, reporting, and machine language, and there are other details. All right, we'll move on so before moving on to the demo, we'll be using two personas. One is Adam, who is a vendor manager from the client, and then we have Owen, who is a vendor contact from the vendor, which we are going to use as Cloud MSP. All right, sorry, let me quickly bring in the demo screen. Just bear with me, please. All right, so I hope my screen is still visible, right? And as a vendor manager, like I mentioned, as Adam, when I'm logged in, right, as a vendor manager in an organization or the client, I have an access to vendor workspace, which gives me a complete picture of vendor posture in an organization. So in a single pane, I can see how many vendors have been onboarded in the organization, the number of engagements we are doing with them, what are the risk ratings of each of the vendors. We'll come to the risk ratings, how it is calculated in further course of the demo, and what are the top risk areas which are identified for other vendors, and how many issues we are raising, how many issues we have been which have been raised for different vendors, right? There are other reports and dashboards which are available, uh, which helps us to define, like, so for example, if we are sending assessments to the list of questionnaires, how many open assessments are there, how many open tasks, or how many open issues. So basically, this workspace provides a single pane on a single page where any leadership from an organization can view how does my risk posture from a vendor risk management perspective uh, looks like. Right now, further moving on to the demo, we would take a vendor. We will go with a vendor where with a high risk rating, where it is Cloud MSP, right? So as a client vendor manager, I can see all the informations related to the specific vendor, the Cloud MSP, who is the vendor manager, the rank tier, who is the business owner, what is the risk rating, what are the different components which are involved in the risk rating, how many assessments are open with them, issues or any tasks which are open with them, right? One of the features of platform, one of the platform features is something called 360-degree view. Now, what this 360-degree view provides me, again, in a single page, I can have a look for my vendor Cloud MSP. I can see how many engagements I'm doing with them, right? How many assessments are pending, how many assessments which have been shared with them, how many tiering assessments are there, how many issues which have been raised with them, right? So it gives me a single view, or like a map view, which gives me an overall posture of the vendor. Okay, now for the to perform the risk management, like we have been talking about, right? So, sorry, is it that right? So, to perform the risk management for a third party, we would start by tiering the vendor. We will be starting by doing the tiering assessment for the vendor. When we say tiering assessment, it is a set of questions which needs to be answered by the client or the organization within itself. So this is an assessment, like we'll see, which has a workflow behind it. We have draft, awaiting response, the tiering assignment is done, and the finally assessment is assigned, right? So based on the response received of the assessment, the platform will calculate a score and populate the tier level, what we see here, very high for the vendor. And these questions, which I'm going to show you right now, are pretty much configurable as per the need of the client. So for this particular vendor, we sent out a list of questionnaires to the internal organization. So for example, if I click on basic, right, and if I click on, so if I see here, we can see all these questions which are there, the nature of relationships, the nature of interaction with these vendors. So these are all questions which needs to be answered within the organization, so that we can define the tier rating for that. And again, like I mentioned, all these questions are configurable as the client requirements. It can be assigned to different departments. So for example, the financial questions can be assigned to the finance department, IT related or cyber related questions can be assigned to the cyber team, hence and so forth. So once we are done with the tiering assessment, right? Uh, Once the tiering assessment is done, the vendor manager, in this case, Adam, will initiate an assessment to the vendor itself. These questions and assessments, right, let me share. Yes. Okay. Give me a second. Right. So these questions and assessments can be segregated into different risk areas. So if I open a particular assessment, sorry, so for example, I'm opening an assessment, and this is the assessment which is sent to the vendor, the list of questionnaires which needs to be answered, right? So these questions and assessments can be segregated into different risk areas. So for example, we have reputational based questions, we have financial viability or cloud security based questions, right? Which are based on which the vendor responds. One of the factors which determines this risk rating of the vendors is how they respond to the question, right? Like I mentioned, this once we send this question, once this assessment is sent to the vendors, it follows its own workflow. So like we can see here, these questions right now, this particular assessment, IT vendor risk assessment for cloud MSP, it is submitted to the vendor, then there will be a response received. These response will be reviewed by the client or the organization, and furthermore, if there are any observations which needs to be raised, and then we can finalize the vendor and close the assessment, right? Now we will move on to the vendor. So once these questions are sent to the vendor, we'll quickly move on how do the vendor responds to them. So for that, I'll quickly sorry, just bear with me a minute. I'm quickly sharing my screen. Just bear with me, please. I'm logging into the vendor. How will the vendor respond to those questions? Apologies for the delay. Here we go.
Okay, so now that we're logged into our vendor persona here, on the homepage, it is separated into two sections. So for the top one, we can see the assessment summaries where Owen here can see all the assessments, the issues, and the tasks that has been assigned to this particular vendor. And the bottom, we can see the engagement for this vendor that is responsible for. And one of the things that Owen can do and manage on his own, he can assign a primary contact for the company. So we can go ahead and go to manage my team menu. Yes. So he can invite someone. For example, if it requires someone from the risk department to be one of the primary contact for an engagement, he can go ahead and invite someone from the risk department to be the contact for the vendor. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the homepage. So we can go into the assessments. Okay, so on this page, we can see the open assessment where the vendor can track the progress of the assessment that has been assigned to them. So they can see the pending questionnaires, the pending document request, and for under this particular assessment, we can see that there are 4 requests being made. By 3 is the questionnaire and 1 is a document request. And for example, what Owen can do here, let's say for financial viability, which is assigned to Owen, he might not have enough information to provide for this particular request. So he can assign this to someone that might have such information, such as Leah Wu, which is a chief financial officer. So when we made this switch, Leah would get a notification that a request had been made, and since we are signed into Owen, he won't be able to make any edits on this request. So this help allocate the work and help the vendor ensure that the right people are providing the information to the client. And okay, let's go into SOC 1 report. So for this, the request is fully customizable based on the client's requirements. So let's say the question is answered a certain way. For this one, it's asking if the vendor has a SOC 1 report available. If we answer yes, it would trigger certain conditions. So for this one, it would trigger that, okay, the vendor needs to provide a document such as a SOC 1 report, and they can go ahead and upload the report and save as draft. So once we go back here, the vendor can go ahead and check if all the required information has been completed, and they can go ahead and resubmit the assessment back to the client. And all this is done on the vendor portal, which is a separate portal from what the client would be using, and for increased security. And with the seamless integration of ServiceNow solution, we can help increase the efficiency and also visibility of the third-party risk management process for both the vendor and the client. Okay, back to you, Arpit.
Sure. Thanks, Titan. Like Titan mentioned, right? So the platform provides a single place wherein the client can manage their own vendors, and within the same platform, a separate portal is created for the vendors to respond to those assessments. So it basically mitigates the use of an Excel file, the email sending out to the vendors, and all those collaborations between the vendor and the vendor manager can be done via the single platform, right? And like I mentioned earlier, the vendor risk ratings can be determined not just by the factors, of the vendor risk assessments. It can also be like, we can also integrate it with other third-party scores like UpGuard, BitSight, Intros, or Rapid Ratings, which will help us to get the risk scores and further update the risk rating of the vendors. So for example, if I have integrated, the platform easily or seamlessly integrates with UpGuard, and we can get the scores or the raw scores, what we say, from UpGuard if we have a subscription for it, right? So the platform can integrate with UpGuard or Intros or Rapid Ratings and provide the scores related to this particular vendor, which is Work Faster. So to showcase the integrations, we are using another vendor, which is Work Faster, and we can see how the integration it affects the overall scores as well. So for example, if I go back to my risk overview tab, right, I can see what are the components which are affecting my final risk rating. So vendor risk assessments, the external monitoring, what we talked about, are the third-party providers. Finally, I would like to touch base upon the repeating assessments. Within the platform, right, we have another feature called repeating assessments, which can be configured, or which will trigger a list of questions or a new assessment to the third party automatically based upon the specified duration. So as a vendor manager, I do not need to remember that, okay, do not need to set a reminder by myself that, I need to send a new list of questionnaires to the vendor again after 6 months. The platform can automate that workflow for you. Right. With this, that was a quick short demo on how ServiceNow can help you to automate your processes in third-party risk management. We will further open this for Q&A.
And Titan for the demo. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, just maybe to start this Q&A with a question on the demo, which we have just seen, which either Patrick or yourself might be able to respond to. So because it was quite impressive to see the points which Gavin mentioned, that if we look at what does the future of third-party risk management look like, we were talking, yes, there needs to be a workflow at the center, and it needs to then orchestrate the activities that are happening across different functions. And I think also the integration with the external sources. And Arpit, you showed that yes, these integrations, they are available, they are doable.
Right.
So I think a question on this is how complicated, how much effort is actually required in order to put in place and establish these integrations?
So thank you, Flo. I mean, it's a good question. So there are certain out of the box or out of the shelf connectors, like with Intros, what we see here, Intros, UpGuard, BitSite, right? These are pretty much easily we can integrate. It's not complex. We just need to have the subscription, their username and password, and it seamlessly integrates with the platform. So it is not rocket science to integrate third party or the vendor risk management platform with any of these third party providers.
Okay, and I think
Yeah, and Arpit,
yeah.
maybe I would like to add more to that. So what you're saying is that the integration capability is not just on the vendor risk management, but it is also one that the ServiceNow platform can provide to many different areas. So as you all know, and in the earlier discussions, we are talking about aggregating all that data, creating a common services data model. So that is where the ServiceNow platform allows you to have different types of connectors and integration methodology to draw all those information. So not just third-party information from the various content sources, but also any other information that can come in from the client internal systems or some banking systems. We can also integrate that.
Absolutely. Sure. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay, great. And also just, I think one more thing to clarify or elaborate a bit more on. So I understand both Arpit and Titan, you were both accessing essentially the same platform, but through different, let's say, entry points, through different portals, which, yeah, I think you addressed this point, kind of eliminated the need to send emails across and then not knowing exactly where we are, at which step we are being stuck at the moment. But if say we as the organization are having our third party to connect to our platform through the portal, how much effort is it actually for us to like manage the different users, the different people that our vendor needs in order to perform their assessments? How much say effort does it take?
So Flo, like the platform provides a separate portal altogether, which is using the same platform, like the data from the same platform. However, it's altogether separate portal. And as a platform or as a vendor manager, right? Like we mentioned here. So Owen, as a person from the vendor, they can manage their own teams, right? So they can easily from the vendor portal itself, they can just quickly click on invite contact, and they will be able to create a new contact. So for example, they want to invite someone from the finance team to answer a certain set of questions. They can quickly create these vendor contacts, and an automated email notification goes to the vendor contacts based on the email specified with the username and password to be able to log into the system. So it's pretty easy, like just a normal user management, just creating a user by the vendor itself.
Okay, so that's excellent. So actually, some of the effort that we would have as the organization, as the user of these services, is actually performed by our service provider.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Okay, maybe moving a little bit away from the demo related questions. Maybe looking at third-party risk management more broadly. So I mean, this session we focused on financial services. We touched a bit on the regulatory requirements that are particularly dominant, I think, in that particular space. But maybe Zeynep and Gavin, I understand you also have quite a bit of exposure of working with clients in other sectors. And it might actually be quite interesting for financial institutions as well to maybe look a little bit beyond and understand maybe what are possibly some good practices or the challenges that organizations in other sectors are facing. So can you maybe share a little bit of the experience on that topic, Gavin?
Perfect, fantastic, thank you. So we are seeing now. I mean, if I look back over the last couple of years, with the impacts of COVID, the pandemic, and just broader supply chain challenges and issues with sanctions across different countries, etc., and Ukraine, a number of challenges that are there. We have seen I guess, an increased focus now from boards, from executives on supply chain management, third-party risk management. So when you look at it, it is access not only to just the services that are being provided and how they're being managed appropriately, say for example from a financial services perspective, but it's also about access to goods, just broader goods and services, and when you take broader supply chains, the ability for access to products, etc., globally as well. So what that's meant is we've seen a broad brush focus from all industries, which I'd say for the first time, but a real heightened focus on understanding third-party and supply chain management. So we are seeing it listed as within, I think, operational risks. It's the sixth highest operational risk being viewed globally at the moment now, and that follows the cyber and fraud. And that's hence obviously a strong focus at a boardroom table, boardroom discussion. And what we're then seeing is organizations now taking a real grassroots foundational look at how they're set up and structured. And when I was talking around before around the operating model, non-financial service organizations are looking at it in the same way. They're looking at to say, how are we set up in our organization to manage the risks that are relevant to the services being provided? Who are our suppliers or third parties? So let's understand across the organization who's engaging with who, and how do we make sure that we can get our arms around it to understand what that list is. So we're seeing, I guess, foundational, what's the list of suppliers and third parties? What are the types of services that they're providing or supporting? What are the risks that now need to be covered and managed? And how do we do that in a smarter way? So again, it's building it out across an enterprise. So a lot of that is very, very, very consistent across I guess the appreciation for it is consistent across financial services and non-financial services. We are still seeing a focus and a requirement from a regulatory perspective within financial services to drive the uplift faster. So although other organizations and other industries are looking to do it and coming up to speed, the regulatory impetus that financial services has not been as strong, for example, that we've had within financial services for a number of years now. I'll say financial services probably is the last 12 months has probably got a heightened focus on it, but it's tended to always be there, the requirements, but not necessarily as well managed and set up. So yeah, so as I was saying, that the comparison between it is there is a broad brush increased focus across the board now, really around what needs to be done, and the levels of maturity are starting to creep up, and we're seeing non-financial service organizations looking at what financial service organizations are doing, and we're seeing some financial service organizations looking to say, well, hold on a sec, I've now got an energy provider that's out there and they're starting to really manage their supply chain really, really well. How are they looking at their downstream impact of fourth parties and subcontractors and others that they may be managing that well? So there's elements there which we're seeing people are picking up on different practices. Is there anything you wanted to add?
Maybe just to focus, because I think as we have seen more major disruptions across the board, I think as Gavin rightly mentioned, it's not limited to financial services. All the organizations are now exposed. In managing that, one of the other examples is coming from government side is Australian government is looking at across the board all the critical infrastructure and how those organizations are managing their third-party risks as well, not only with their immediate third parties, but across the downstream, just to really understand what are the exposures, who the organizations are engaging with, and the way they manage their exposure, the risks in multiple different dimensions. I think it's becoming more and more, fact and expectation in the industry that everybody needs to have a solid understanding of how they manage their third parties, what is the major exposures, and even their fourth and end parties that come into play. They need to be carefully, managed and monitored.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Zainab. And then I think that's probably all time that we have for the Q&A for today, conscious of the time. So maybe what we can do in the last few minutes is to maybe wrap up this session. So I think what we can probably all agree on is that third-party risk management is really a crucial and critical capability for business kind of to sustain their operations and manage their risks effectively. Well, but I think a lot of times I've heard from Gavin, from Zainab, from everyone that, well, oftentimes we should find ways of maybe working smarter than working necessarily harder. And I think a lot of this is linked to this risk-based approach, thinking like, okay, do we need to treat all of our third parties in the same way with the same comprehensive checklist or questionnaire? Or are there ways how we can be more focused, to focus first of all on what are our most critical vendors that are linked to our most critical services? And then how can we maybe tailor or enhance the questionnaires that we are using so that they are really more relevant? So I think that's a common theme that I've observed from the conversations today. Obviously, there are a lot of other potential actions, measures that you as a client, you as an organization could be looking at. I think what's important to note is, and I think that has also been nicely addressed earlier, that it really depends on how far you have already moved on your maturity journey towards kind of advanced third-party risk management. If you're more like at a starting level, then other measures are actually more suitable and will be impacting you in a more beneficial, in a more positive way. Whereas if you're already fairly advanced, you already have your risk-based approach, I think then that's where you can look at some of the more sophisticated tweaks to your third-party risk management program. So again, in essence, I think you need to look for an effective risk management framework and an operating model that allows you to perform these activities effectively. And then you can also look for how can we bring in the technology or a platform that will allow us to then further drive consistencies and efficiencies in the way that we are managing our third-party risks. So I think before we close the session, so if any of you on this webinar is now interested to learn more about any of the topics that we have discussed before, or you would like to have more in-depth demos of the platform, then please feel free to leave us comments in the survey, which you can access by scanning the QR code that you are seeing on your screen right now. So we definitely would be very keen to be having further conversations with you, so we can help you do current state assessments to identify maybe what are the measures that would be most suitable based on your specific needs to uplift and move upwards on that maturity ladder. We can also help you transform your risk function, and also we can help you in performing maybe some of these third-party risk management kind of monitoring activities that you could be possibly engaging us to support you on as well. So if you would like to discuss, get more insights on anything we've discussed today, see more demos, please feel free to leave us comments in the survey, and also any other feedback, suggestions. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. So yeah, before we let you all go, I hope you were able to take some relevant insights back to your organizations and some ideas about, okay, what can we actually do to further uplift and improve the way that we are managing third-party risk in our organization. So I do hope you have found this session useful and valuable. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to speak to you or meet you at some later point. So thank you very much and have a great day, everyone. And thank you so much to our panelists as well. Thank you so much for spending the time and providing your insights. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.